Hello and welcome to FeckTV.com. This is the news live at 7 with myself, Noel Byrne, and here beside me is Alan Noonan. We've got all the latest on today's top stories from Ireland and around the world, and we're kicking off with some interesting remarks from Minister for Justice Alan Shatter today. He's hit back at claims surrounding the closure of 95 Garda stations. The claim that people make, of course, is that closures will lead to an increase. Excuse me. The claims, of course, that people are making are that the closures will lead to an increase in violent crimes, particularly in rural areas. Alan Shatter was quoted as saying that the closures have nothing to do with the tightening of purse strings, and the quality of policing will improve as well, which is an interesting, tidbit for him to come out to say that the policing will improve, considering there's so many stations being closed.
Yeah, his argument is that this is going to lead to 61,000 extra Garda hours on the front lines, policing activity. But I suppose the question has to be asked is whether or not this will lead to a sort of diminishing of local knowledge that Gardaí who are out in these remote places are going to know about these regions. So, I mean, if it does actually facilitate Gardaí going out on the beat, well, then that's fantastic. But whether or not there is this emphasis on community policing within a Garda force that doesn't have the resources to take its cars out, that is limited to maybe one car a station, there might be the road mileage on them is way up. I've heard horror stories from many Gardaí about the limited resources that they have.
Well, he had a couple of interesting quotes today, kind of hitting back at the claims. He said that the force clearly can't operate on the basis of a Garda station network designed by the British government between 1850 and 1900 for policing the rebellious Irish. I suppose there is, a bit of truth behind that, in the sense that there are a lot of very rural Garda stations where, they might only be manned by one guard for a few hours a day, which he went on to say that stations manned only for a few hours in a day didn't deter burglars at all, which is what a lot of people are claiming. And his reasoning is that the spike in crime in 2011 occurred before any of the closures. It's a funny one, because I can see where he's coming from in some aspects, but then you have to think of, people who might be living in particularly rural areas. A lot of elderly people would be very worried, in their homes, because they might hear of burglaries or violent crimes occurring in other counties nearby. So,
yeah, the perception is that these Garda stations will mean that there's less Gardaí out there because the Garda station. But these are Garda stations anyway that would only be open maybe 2-3 hours a week, or a day maybe, just by one Garda who's kind of inside there, huddled away inside in the corner. So we'll see whether or not what happens. And you're right, actually, what you said about him blaming the British. They were actually originally detection stations for an Irish insurrection that the British were using. So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, there was just one more thing that he mentioned today, was that the closures, as we've kind of alluded to already, is that there's going to be an increased Garda visibility, an improvement in Garda mobility, and a maximisation of the well-trained, highly skilled Gardaí. So it almost sounds like he pushed it a little bit too far, trying to oversell the fact that the guards will be more visible now. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll just seem like time will tell whether or not these burglaries in rural constituencies will continue, and whether or not the more man hours the Gardaí have will actually lead to more violent crime being solved. Moving on to our next story, we're talking about Ryanair and the case of volcano ash. The EU Court of Justice in Luxembourg ruled that Ryanair must pay €1,130 to Denise McDonough for costs she incurred when her flight was cancelled and had to be rescheduled. She was flying back from Portugal to Ireland, and she was claiming the costs incurred for meals, accommodation and transport. And Ryanair, during that incident with the Icelandic volcanic ash, cancelled 9,400 flights, had to refund passengers' tickets and settle all reasonable expense claims, which totaled €32 million.
Yeah, I can't imagine the bosses at Ryanair in any way happy with the ruling today. Their argument was, well, it seemed a bit flawed, to be honest, very weak. Their solicitors were arguing that, that the volcanic eruption was beyond extraordinary circumstances. They were focusing in on the word particularly. Their argument was that the volcanic eruption was so extraordinary that it was beyond particularly extraordinary circumstances. So definitely a game of semantics on Ryanair's behalf, because even as I read the news as it came out, I was like, they're arguing that it's that and that. You know, it's kind of a hard one to follow. Maybe they were hoping to dupe the court in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And what kind of made it even more preposterous was that they were the only airline to take this sort of a case, not refunding their passengers. So not only are they being doubly blamed for, firstly, that they have to pay the 32 million in costs to their passengers, but secondly, they're after getting this heap of negative publicity over the whole case. So you kind of wonder, why didn't they just originally pay out what they were obligated to under law and just take the hit, which every other airline seems to have done?
I suppose on the flip side, Ryanair aren't accustomed to, you know, positive news, so you know, maybe they just wanted to feel more comfortable getting a bit of negative press. But at the same time, people always argue that Michael O'Leary, you know, doesn't mind whether the press is negative or positive, because either way, Ryanair is getting coverage, and ultimately, people will still keep booking flights at Ryanair because they are the cheapest airline out there. So, you know, is it that bad?
Well, they do have the reputation, and I don't know if you could argue that all publicity is good publicity with regards to Ryanair's attention, but I don't know, you're better off generally not to alienate your own passengers. But we're staying in Ireland with our next news story, which deals with Minister James Riley, and he stated today in a press conference that he hopes that legislation dealing with abortion will become law by the summer. Riley also added that a memo on policy issues around abortion will go to the Cabinet next week. This follows on the Oireachtas Health Committee report, which was given to the Minister, but also contained no recommendations within its report about what exactly the legislation might be.
Yeah, they've literally just compiled everything everyone said at the hearings. It almost didn't merit an announcement today, to be honest. It'll be interesting to see whether, you know, either of the camps involved, whether they're pro-abortion or anti-abortion, are going to delay it now between here and, we'll say, Easter. Because either side, you know, will argue. One side, those for abortion will argue that, you know, it's not going far enough, and those against it will say it's opening the floodgates, particularly around the issue of suicide. So the government are definitely going to be under a lot of stress in terms of where they go with this, as we've already discussed on this programme several times. I suppose the other side of it as well is, could there be a huge fallout from this for the government parties?
Yeah.
You know, Labour, they're a bit more liberal when it comes to this issue, but Fine Gael, a lot of backbenchers, very much not for the introduction of legislation in any shape or form.
Yeah, once again, it seems like Minister Riley has managed to confuse everybody, including those who might support him. He came out today and said that legislation on abortion will be passed, but it seemed all along that the legislation that was only going to be introduced was going to clarify what exactly was going on there, rather than introduce a sort of abortion on demand, as it were. But it seems like Minister Riley, once again, is an excellent way of stirring up debate and causing anger amongst people.
Well, he is, you know, he's been frequently called here on the News at 7 as the Minister for cock-ups, so this could be just another one of those moments where he's said something that he maybe shouldn't have. But I guess we'll have to wait and see in terms of how that legislation does indeed pan out. To Israel next, and of course the tensions are continuing in the Middle East after Iran have warned Israel of grave consequences following their alleged airstrike yesterday on a military facility in Syria. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Hossein Amir said that the Zionist regime's attack on the outskirts of Damascus will have grave consequences. The remarks follow Iran's Foreign Minister's own condemning of the attack, in which he called it brutal aggression. And he claims as well that it was a part of a Western and Zionist strategy to push aside the success of the Syria people and government to return to stability and security. Interestingly, on this one, Israel have neither confirmed nor denied that they actually carried out the airstrike, and they also haven't commented on whether or not they struck a weapons convoy on the Syria-Lebanon border. So, interesting times for Israel.
This just reminds me of a fella after whipping on a fella inside a hurling pitch with his hurley, and the whole crowd, every other player's after seeing it, but not the referee, and he just holds up his hand saying, what did I do? What did I do? Meanwhile, the guy is writhing on the ground, rolling around the place. This also comes...
I never thought we'd be able to tie in a GA analogy to the troubles in the Middle East.
Everything is an analogy to a hurling match, of course. But the report also came out today from the UN, which slammed Israel for its policy on Israel settlements, saying that they have taken a heavy toll on the rights and sovereignty of Palestinians. So this is overall a bad news day for Israel. It seems like Israel has been quite happy to alienate as many people as possible with its recent domestic policy and with its recent foreign policy as well.
They definitely seem to be almost, as you said, drawing attention to themselves as though they're urging others to attack. You'd kind of question what their motives are here. Do they want some sort of inter-country war to break out in the region, or? It
almost seems like Israel has been emboldened by the US ever-hardening right-wing stance on Israel. The idea that there can't really be any criticism of Israel. There was a Republican who was being nominated for the post of Secretary of Defense, and he stated that he was in favor of a Palestinian nation as well as an Israeli nation, and he was slammed as being anti-Semitic. So it seems like with this sort of rhetoric going on in the US, it has almost encouraged Israel to act in this way, dare I say.
Yeah, they're very much, standing out on their own on this one. They're kind of a bit like, they remind me of North Korea in some ways. They're just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But not as crazy.
We're going back to Leitrim there, where a missing property developer has suddenly appeared. Kevin Michael McGreever, age 68, was missing for 8 months, and he was found injured, distressed and starving in a lane in County Leitrim. He was in a disorientated state, covered in a plastic bag and without shoes, which I'm sure many students might be able to commiserate with. And he is understood to have told Gardaí a number of men in a van dropped him off, and he couldn't recall where he had been for 8 months. So that is not exactly a typical student.
It's brilliant that he's returned, and I'm sure his family are glad, but it's really not. It's hard not to laugh at that story when you hear the details of it, because it almost sounds like he may just have spent the last 8 months on a bender, getting away from life's problems.
Yeah, there was one other funny detail. Well, not funny. This is very serious, obviously. Thank goodness that he's emerged in Leitrim, of all places, after 8 months disappearing. But he was involved in property deals in the Middle East, so you'd almost wonder if this was something to do with it. What do you think, Noel? No? Did
his disappearance coincide with the traffic light that used to exist in Leitrim going missing as well, or anything like that, I wonder?
What exactly is the story with this van and people found in it? And not only that, but to dress him up in a plastic bag to add insult to injury. Who took his shoes?
Could have used a reusable bag. Would have been more environmentally friendly. Moving on to our last story tonight, and this is one of those where, as you hear the details, you can feel the pain suffered by the victim, and it is from the Sichuan province in China, home of the famous sauce as well. 22-year-old Li Mei Feng, she was rushed to hospital after she accidentally mixed up her eye drops with glue. So she reached into her bag. She was on the train with her sister. They were going to see their parents. Her eyes were feeling a bit dry after the tough day at work. She reached for her bag, took out what she thought was a bottle of eye drops. Instead, it was nail glue. Squeeze, squeeze, right eye glued shut. Her sister obviously reacted quite quickly, noticing that there was somewhat of a minor problem. She got the attention of the train attendants, who didn't really do that much. They brought her to the toilet and used some water to clear out the eye from a sink, I imagine, not the toilet itself. But it didn't work at all, so she had to wait till they got to their destination before she was rushed to hospital in an ambulance.
Yeah.
And they were able to fix her up, and now she has fully recovered, thankfully.
Yeah.
There was one odd aspect of the story that I was intrigued by, and that was the fact that she said she had mixed up the glue compartment in her bag with the eye drop compartment. Why someone has a compartment specifically for glue in their bag, I have no idea.
I have 2 compartments for glue in my bag, yes, and one other one for eye drops. But ladies, avoid getting anything sticky in your eyes in the future, would always be advice to live by. And on that note, I think we can end the news tonight.
Yes, we can. Don't forget at 8 o'clock, Danny and Shane are here with the entertainment show, Swish Pan. And at 10 o'clock tonight, we are discussing the topic of cyberbullying that will be live at 10 o'clock here on FeckTV.com. So join us then.